In this video, I'm going to teach you how to checkmate with a king and a rook against just a king. Coming up. So real quick before we start, I just want to remind you I post new videos every week. If you don't want to miss out on those, you can click the subscribe button and then turn on the bell, and YouTube will notify you when a new video comes out. But now, let's get started. So the basic idea is that black's king needs to be on the edge of the board. So any of the edges is fine, but you cannot checkmate him if he's in the center of the board. It has to be on the edge of the board. The next thing, you have to use your king to help out your rook. You cannot checkmate with only your rook. You have to use both your king and your rook together. And then third and finally, the idea that we're going to follow is this box. So the idea is going to be to continually make this box smaller until we have forced black's king to the edge of the board. So let's look at exactly how we would do that if we're playing in a game. First of all, you would bring your king forward. Black can go there, and now you have supported your rook with your king. So that's the first step. Now we need to try to force the king to the edge of the board. So if black moves his king, let's say here, first thing that I want you to notice is the rook creates this box. So the king cannot pass these lines. So what your goal is to continually make that box smaller and smaller until black's king is on the edge of the board. So how can we make this box smaller with our rook? Well, I can move it right here, and now it's a little bit smaller. Okay, now if black's king moves up here, how can we make the box smaller? Well, we can move our rook here, but the problem with that, I'm sure you've noticed, he could just take us, right? Because our king is no longer defending the rook. So in cases when you cannot make a rook move to make the box smaller, you always have to make a king move. That's just something you can remember. If you can't make a rook move, you move your king. So in this case, I'm going to move my king here because it's closer to his king, and it's going to force him towards one of these edges, which is what we're trying to accomplish. So if black moves here, I have two options. I can make the box smaller with my rook, like we talked about. Alternatively, I can just move my king forward, which in this case is even better. It just forces him further back. So let's say he tries to go to the side. Now, again, this is the box that the rook currently makes. But if I move my rook up to here, we've made it a little bit smaller. Okay? If black moves here, now do I have any rook moves that make the box smaller? Smaller than this box right here? Well, you might say you could go here to make it a little smaller, but what's the problem with that? I'm sure you can see he can escape. He can simply move out, and then the box is actually bigger. So to back that up, in this case, I don't have a rook move, so I simply move my king. And then he's going to be forced to move somewhere. Let's say he goes here, and now I can bring my king up to further push his king closer to one of these edges. So he knows he doesn't want to go to the edge, so he's probably going to move here. And now I can play rook check, which is going to force his king to the edge. So he has four options at this point. Okay, so let's look at this one first. Now this is a very key position in the Rook and King endgame that you really need to understand, because it might not be this exact position, but something very similar will probably show up in your game, and you need to understand what exactly is going on and how to best proceed. So here's what's happening. Black just moved, so it's white's turn. Okay, it is white's turn right now, but let's just pretend for a second. Let's pretend that it was black's turn. If it was black's turn, where can he move to? He can't move there because the rook covers it. He can't move there because the rook. He can't move there because the king, my king. And he can't move here because my king. So the only space that black's king could move to if it was his turn would be right here. Make it green. That's where black could move to if it was his turn. And if he were to move there, we would simply move our rook here and have a checkmate. Okay, very easy, right? But it's our turn, so we have to do something. So what do? This is a case in chess where you would play what's called a waiting move. Now, a waiting move is a move that you make, but it doesn't change the key features about the position. I'll say that one more time. A waiting move is a move that you make, but it doesn't change the key features about the position. What's the key feature about this position that we don't want to change? We would like black to have to go to this square, and we want to keep our king here because it's going to be covering all of his escape routes, and we need to keep our rook blocking black's king from going this way. So if you know all of those things, what is the move that white can make to keep all of those true? I'll give you a second to think about it. If you said rook here, you would be correct. And actually, any of these moves would be totally fine. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves that white could make, and they would all be perfectly fine. Why is that? They keep the rook on this file. They keep the king in the spot that we want to cover these 3 squares, which means after we move, let's just choose this one because it's kind of cool because it's so far away. After we make that move, black, as we talked about, his only option is to go to this square. And now we can simply bring the rook in for checkmate because he cannot escape because of our king. So that waiting move concept is very important and will come up a lot in the Rook Endgame, and you need to understand how to find the waiting move. So I hope that made sense. Leave me a comment below if you figured that out, or if it didn't make sense or you have more questions. I'll be happy to answer those. Okay, so now I backed up to this position that we were at before. Remember the king moved here, and then we talked about the waiting move. Well, what if he would have went here, let's say? Well, he's attacking our rook, so we can bring our king up to defend it. And now black's king only has one move. He goes over here. And now we can bring our king over, so we've cut off all of his escape routes, and we're setting up to play checkmate. But the same problem that we had before we have again, he's going to move here, and he's attacking our rook. We cannot go there right now, or he simply captured us. So this is another example of where we need to do a waiting move. So take a minute and try to figure out what is the waiting move that white needs to play in this position. And I'll give you just 3 seconds to figure that out. Congratulations if you found it. The correct moves are actually any of these. So any of these rook moves would be totally fine. So we'll just choose one. And after he moves the king over to the only available space, you come in for the checkmate. And the king controls these 3 squares, so he can't escape this way. So now that you know how to do that, the best thing that I would recommend you do is go practice it a couple times. I'll post some links in the description below if you want to check that out, places where you can practice against the computer just to make sure that you know how to do the checkmate. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you learned something, please hit the like button. And now it's time for the post-lesson puzzle. This is the position. It's white to play and checkmate in one move. If you think you can find it or you think you know what the answer is, post it in the comments below and let me know. Thanks a lot.